All right, so we are back from our break. So welcome back, everyone. So now we are joined by Dr. Christian Dieffenbach from the West Virginia University. We just had her recently on our podcast and have recorded an excellent episode about what actually professionalism is. And today she will speak a bit about the different topic. But Dr. Dieffenbach, thanks again for joining us today and for doing this presentation for the conference.
Thank you, Rick. And thank you everybody for being here, and thank you for the opportunity to do this. It's always a thrill to hear my name pronounced in proper German, which is always really exciting for me. But also I've been really excited with what Derek and Rick have put together. They have put together two really great events so far, and then today's event as well, about the ACT and the art of coaching and athlete development. And there's been such great inclusion about the talk about supporting coaches and the pathways and development of coaching as the field evolves beyond workshops and programs. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit about how do we continue that growth and some work that I'm doing with USA Hockey in that area with some colleagues, just to share how we're considering this idea of professional development, education, and leadership in support of our coaches. So just really briefly, for those who might not be familiar with this growing and evolving conversation, it's certainly a global one. Within the United States in the last 5 or 6 years, we've had a huge growth in the call for growing and enriching our systems for health, well-being, development, inclusion, and performance for people of all ages, but in particular for our youth athletes. And like I said, this is also a global initiative. You see this in a lot of the different documents, but these are some of the ones from the United States. And when we take a closer look at things like the Projects Plays, Aspen Institute's document about youth sport in the United States, and the more recent National Youth Sports Strategy from our Department of Health and Human Services, you see these highlights and this importance they're placing on the training of coaches and the recruitment and retention of high quality volunteers in our systems, because much of our youth sport model, even when we get into competitive youth sport, often is heavily contingent on volunteers coaching or people who are coaching for stipend type funding, not full salary funding. And we still need to think about this level of professionalism and support that these volunteers are getting in these spaces. So there have been a number of key leaders around the world that have started to talk about this and have been working on evolving the discipline, both from an academic and an applied perspective, that are creating common languaging and providing a place for these kinds of conversations and for the networking among those of us who are doing this work. And if you've been listening through many of these presentations, you've probably heard mentioned the ICCE, the International Council of Coaching Excellence, the NCDA, the Coach Developer Academy out of Japan, and the USCCE, which is in the United States, the association that's focused on quality coaching education systems and the support and development of these. So within that and within these organizations, there's been a lot of conversation around sport coaching as a profession, and thinking about how do we support this profession and professionalization of the field, not intending or meaning that there needs to be academic degrees per se, although there are certainly great opportunities like at Haugahelia and at many other universities around the world. But we're really talking about this broader piece of raising the expectations and thinking about what that means and how do we do it. And for this, the ICCE has the International Sport Coaching Framework, which can be a really useful tool in helping us think about the roles and the settings in which we coach, the responsibilities and expectations on the coaches, the types of functions and jobs they have, as well as the underpinning knowledge and skills within that model that is contextually and situated to be appropriate for the right age, right stage type coaching. And we'll come back to that point. In addition to that really nice framework model, the ICCE's International Sport Coaching Framework also provides us with a definition that coaching is a process of guided improvement and development in a single sport and at identifiable stages of development. And that becomes important when we start thinking about how we've been evolving the conversation around athlete development and what it takes from the coach, the teacher, the leader to do that well. And so we'll be talking about that as we think about growing the strategies to support the coaching professional through the coaching education and coach development. Now, one of the key tasks of a coach traditionally has always been talent identification. And that has been a huge part of playing games. Even when we don't keep score, the emphasis on winning moments, whether that be a juke or a town line sprint or an amazing catch or an amazing pass, all of those moments where we're thinking about talent and maximizing talent. And that has long been a conversation in most of our sport organizations and leadership documents, because that value and importance that we place on it has grown over time. And Talent ID is now very big business across all sports globally, and a big part of it even down into our youngest youth levels in many cases. But fortunately, the conversation's also been evolving, not just about spotting it, but also about growing it. And this association in the last 20 years, we've seen a growth for the expansion of this conversation about what talent and talent development means, and what is a coach's role and how do they go about doing that. And that becomes an important piece as we think about how are we educating and developing them as professionals. Many of you might be familiar with the Canadian Sport for Life model. This is the most recent version up in the corner there from the Canadian group. And it really provides this really nice evolutionary thinking of talent development based on physical literacy, good quality engagement at the youngest levels, developing that over time for both physical performance and lifetime engagement that seeks to maximize an individual's opportunity and development through sport, with an understanding that this is also about deepening and strengthening our talent pools and deepening and strengthening an individual's experience. So it's kind of a win-win when we start to think about it. And it really starts to provide a curricular model that is holistic, that thinks about expanding the development, not just physically, tactically, and technically in sport, but expanding it to include social and psychological elements, and starting to consider that right age, right stage development. What is someone ready for? What needs to be sequenced? And then also when we think about youth development, adolescent development, brain development, what are they ready to learn and what can they do? What's appropriate at those ages? And so we start thinking about right age, right stage coaching. And more importantly, to our point today, we start thinking about the right age, right stage coach, and how are we thinking about contextualizing our coaching education to prepare for that evolution of thinking. So just really quickly, as we consider and expand the systems and expectations for athlete development, we're also expanding the expectation, responsibilities, and pressures on our coach or our coaching workforce. And as I mentioned before, the vast majority of these folks in many of our systems are volunteers, and the very high turnover and very high and very low engagement in terms of the amount of time they have to spend in that youth sports space. And so we're seeing a lot of different elements coming into play here and expanding that need for and expanding the emphasis on the coaching education and coach development, with an increasing recognition on the complexity of the requirements and the demands that we're placing on them, and the need for knowledge and skills, not just of our sport, but of what we're asking as sport organizations, and how the kids or the athletes or the people that we're working with develop over time as people and as athletes. So we start to take a look at and consider the skills of the expert coach beyond the knowledge of sport alone. Similarities can be seen with the stuff we're looking at with coaches, also in our expert teachers and our expert leaders when we look across the literature. And so currently, coaching education programs certainly exist, but we don't always have a good handle on how they are doing this and developing these other skills of expertise and leadership and teaching, in addition to their sport content knowledge. And so as we think about systems of education and systems of development, we really need to back up and think about some of these things as well. And that's where I'm going to talk a little bit, just a few minutes here, about what we've done within the US, specifically within USA Hockey's program, as we've helped evolve and develop some of the systems there. And I do want to make sort of a brief side note here, because many people assume that the United States has a very well-organized system. And in reality, when we've taken a look at this, we have over 80,000 organizations that are associated with sport in the United States. 12,000 of those roughly are scholastic programs. There are just around 50 national governing bodies or national governing organizations within the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee umbrella. And we have a wide range of classifications, from for-profit and not-for-profit, across all levels of sport and across all contexts, from competitive to Olympic development to youth recreation to adult participation. And they don't exist under any one concrete umbrella, which becomes a bit of an interesting challenge, because there's little to no unification within the United States systems of how to best prepare and support coaches particularly the volunteer army, with all of these different organizations providing different things and pieces that suit their systems, but aren't necessarily unified. And so as we were looking and talking about these challenges and considerations, we had the opportunity that emerged to work with USA Hockey, one of the NGBs that really is sitting in a leadership space, as I'll talk about. So when I say we, I'm talking about the USCCE, the United States Center for Coaching Excellence, which is a number of us that are working with a national nonprofit organization in the United States that is designed and developed to support coaching education programs and systems and network together those folks who provide coaching education and development. And our mission really being around that systems. How do we strengthen the quality of coach development systems through guided program development, training and support of those who develop coaches, and accelerating the accreditation of programming that are really hitting on the best practices and the current leadership ideas in coach education and coach development. So we were able to connect over with USA Hockey, and I'm sure many of you in the hockey community are aware of the ADM model that USA Hockey put together a little bit over 10 years now with Ken Martell and Mark Tabram and many of the others there. And they've really been a pioneer in the United States system in designing and supporting, not just as a unit within USA Hockey, but as a leadership organization, national governing body, a holistic youth development model within the youth sports space, and have been very instrumental in helping many of our other national governing bodies consider and explore these types of models and look to grow them within communities and provide the resources, not as a directive, this is how you have to do it, but as a curricular framework, much like we see in our school systems, to help support the coaches in being that right age, right stage type of coach. And yet, as they were evolving and growing this, they recognized some challenges in their system and how it was going from the conceptualization in the models to actually working on the ground, which is how we got involved in and began talking. And so this is where the system sort of currently was, and where many of them are, with both the ADM and the coaching education programming coming together to provide levels of presentations and information for coaches led by presenters, typical PowerPoint slides and those types of things, that focused on giving coaches knowledge, and that hopefully was then trickling down to the athlete experience and the development. And within the USA Hockey system, we have roughly 60,000 coaches, the majority of which are in youth, with about 10,000 new coaches that come in every year, and about 30,000 that they have to train every year. So a very large system and a lot of stuff to do there. And yet they recognize that the concept of ADM was being introduced as a knowledge point, but was not necessarily making it to some of those application of skills and ideas that we were mentioning earlier that are part of what coaches are supposed to be doing. And so this conversation about building on ADM began about 5 to 7 years ago, where we started talking in small discussions and growing the conversation. And how do we start to introduce adult learning theory, educational principles, and best practice professional development design into the existing coaching education model to bring it into a place where it's not just content, but also coach skill development, and recognizing the vast amount of knowledge that most coaches bring into the space, even at the youth level, because they were players themselves. And how do we recognize and value that, and then provide them with resources and tools of teaching and leadership and modern practices in coaching that could support not only the coaches, but also the systems. So with Ken Martell and Mark Tabram and many others within USA Hockey, and then speaking with folks throughout their front office and their vast volunteer leadership network, we began a series of first very small and then growing workshops that brought us together in groups to explore skills, practice skills, talk about what it meant to be a coach developer, and begin to grow some of those things, culminating on some work that was done end of the year 2019, just prior to COVID, and led us to really looking to evolve the system. And then since COVID, having to do a little bit of tweaking and changing to try to meet this vast shift from in-person workshops to a virtual space. We led off with many of this as the work grew, with exploring these key organizational questions to try to help make sure that as an organization, and these would work whether you're a really big organization or a smaller group, to start to think about how do these priorities fit in, who are the key players, and what are the resources and opportunities to do these types of things. And it was, I should mention here that my colleagues, Melissa Thompson is at University of Southern Mississippi, and Kim Kiosklis, who works with US Rowing and with Drexel University, quite a big part of these ongoing conversations as we've helped shape some of the leadership conversations. And these collaborative conversations really helped us identify this need for concurrent actions within their system, looking at the coaching education materials, the coach development system of how those coaching education materials were being used, and then also recognizing the need for moving away from presenters to more of a model of coach developers, very much in alignment with some of the growing conversations globally from the ICCE and other organizations. And that led to the development of a model that looks something like this, where we still have ADM and coaching education collaborating, with ADM being more focused on the player development and pipeline systems, and the coach development being more specific to the coaches. But the importance and the value of creating a curriculum design and delivery committee that would be exploring and taking a look at what is that curriculum? If we've got an ADM for athletes, what's our ADM, so to speak, for our coaches? And how do we make sure that we have not only the materials for the coaches, but also for the coach developers, these folks that are going to be these master coach developers and coach developers in the system that are not just presenting, but are also supporting and facilitating the coaches as they explore the knowledge and the application of that knowledge. Right now, much of this is focused on the in-person or virtual training that's done. The goal being to eventually expand this out to also support things that go on in the field. So we've sort of structured this with that in mind, although right now it's focused mostly on what's going on in that leveling education that gets done as coaches get their certifications. And again, that emphasis being on supporting the coach's knowledge, skill development, and experience to better enhance the athletes' experience and development opportunities. So where does that put us now? And this is probably the most important, the take homes that I wanted to share with you of this system of supporting emerging coach developers and mentor or master coach developers within the USA Hockey system. Certainly, as I noted, we had a bit of a wrench with COVID, and a lot of the work that we'd been setting up to do, which was helping develop facilitation skills in a classroom, so that the people that were providing the coaching education were comfortable as facilitators and supporting. So it wasn't just facilitation activities, but actually facilitation of learning that could happen in the course in the classroom. We did have to switch that to a virtual model, and certainly in some places it's worked very successfully. In other places it's been a bit more challenged as we look at both technology issues and a slightly different way in which you do facilitation of learning in those spaces. Some of the other key take homes that were really important that I think are essential to highlight here, for those who are coming from an academic lens, this is social learning theory in practice. Learning happening through interactions and supporting high quality interactions, and making sure that the folks that are tasked with supporting and creating those interactions have the skills and the resources, as well as the clarity of job description to do so. So we really worked very hard over several years to conceptualize that role of the coach developer and the mentor coach developer, so that as we looked at a system that is still heavily based on a very highly engaged volunteer army, people that are doing this out of the passion for the sport throughout the network, as well as a much smaller group of people who do this from a paid perspective from the head office or the leadership organization. We really worked to conceptualize those roles and think about where they fit into the system. We focused on creating a system that was not a drop-in from the outside to do it, but something that would grow from the inside for long-term impact. And we focused a lot on human resource identification, an important ongoing conversation of finding the right people, finding the people that are open to our understanding this. And we found a lot of hidden gems in our system, people with educational backgrounds, people with human resource development skills and professional development skills, that when given the opportunity and what they saw and understood what we were trying to create, jumped in with 2 feet, very excited, because this was something that they did in another line of work or another area, and they were happy to bring those skills in. Certainly a lot of role clarification and ownership from within, creating an emphasis on that coach developer strategy, that we couldn't just plug this in and say, here's your task, let's do it. but we're focusing on identifying and creating an identity and skills within those folks. Climate setting and contingency planning. Even pre-COVID, we were working on that. It had to do a lot of shifting, which created a huge need for flexibility and open communication. And then the biggest and the last piece of this is the emphasis on sustainability. This is not something that an outside consulting group such as the USCC came in and did for. They did with the intended purpose of backing out as the system grows, and our role becoming much less as they grow the system within, so that again, it's not a drop-in program, but it's an evolution of their system towards educational design. So to round this out, just to let everyone know, join us in the conversation and explore and network at the next event in the US, the North American Coach Development Summit, where people who are doing this kind of work in all different avenues and places bring it together. There's also information there from the ICC, the internationals. Many of you are European and other places in the world, and they do an amazing job of both virtual and in-person events for this type of stuff. And knowing that I have used up my 20 minutes, I'd like to thank everybody, and I welcome if anybody wants to reach out for questions now or afterwards, please shoot me an email or message me on Twitter, and I'd love to talk about how your systems are growing or what resources we can share in this space as it evolves. So thank you again for having me.
So Kristen, because you were speaking now about questions and we still have a bit time left, so I have a question. Because you were speaking about blending the coach development side from an academic perspective, but how do you blend it for at the same time from a practical perspective and also combined with the academic perspective?
Do you mean blended in terms of virtual and in person, or do you mean blended in terms of the classroom knowledge and the field knowledge?
Yes, exactly this.
Okay, so so I think that's a piece that we often forget as we think about coaching education, is that you certainly need a core level of foundational knowledge, whether that be in the sciences or motor learning, motor development, all the different things, or specific to the sport. What's our system of hockey? How do we teach it? Or what's our philosophy of the game? You have a certain amount of stuff that lends itself better to an application opportunity of classroom or sitting and putting some stuff together. And that doesn't mean it has to be traditional lecture classroom, but it lends itself better for those conversations. But we really are remiss, and we're not really doing education. We're just providing content if we don't also make sure it connects over and collaborates into an applied setting where someone can be practicing and getting feedback, not necessarily from somebody who's got greater wisdom or more experience, but somebody who can help with that conversation of, this is what I saw you doing. What were you working on? How did that go? Let's talk about it. Not necessarily from a hierarchical perspective, but from a peer program development perspective. And I think that becomes a crucial part. It happens very organically in some of our settings, but not enough, especially when we get into our volunteer youth settings and some of the other places. And it doesn't always happen with the intent of making the coach the best coach they can be. Some of the literature suggests right now that all that onboarding and programs is often done just to make sure that someone's fitting a system, as opposed to maximizing their potential as a teacher and leader. And so it's a little bit of a different framing as we think about making sure both those elements are there and making sure we have the right support people with the skills. And we can look to medical models, nursing models, many other fields where there's content knowledge and application of knowledge that's important, that we can steal and pick and take ideas from to fit our space.
Kristen, thanks a lot again, first of all, for the brilliant presentation. And again, thanks for answering also the questions so in depth. And I can only repeat myself is I'm not 100% sure how late it is at your place, but it's always insane to see how much energy and how much passion you have. So, and also at the same time, how much professionalism, because we were speaking about this in our episode and now you were touching on this also a little bit. So it definitely has a place in the coach development system. And we wish you good luck with the future projects, and thanks again for taking the time and doing this here today.
Thanks for giving me an opportunity. Have a great rest of the program.